Welcome to the channel. I appreciate everyone tuning in live. Thanks for being here. We're going to break down the ACC power rankings. Clemson did not have a game. They were on open date, so we will not review last week's Clemson game, but we will go ahead and preview the Louisville game. And then I've got a guest joining, and we're going to talk about Clemson basketball. It starts a week from not this Monday, but the following Monday. It's right around the corner. They went to the Elite Eight last year, so there's a ton to unpack there. A lot of changes on the roster, but still a very good roster, which should be especially interesting. So we'll talk about that too. But we'll start, as we always do, with football and with the ACC power rankings. So I'm going to pull those up. Give me just a second here. All right. And as I like to do, we start at the bottom. I won't spend too much time on some of these bottom feeders. Florida State lost again, as they've done in every game except for their win over Cal, which almost feels fluky now. But they lost to Miami. Their defense actually gave a little bit of a fight for a while, but eventually they were overwhelmed by a more talented, better coached Miami team that looks like they could really have something going this year. Not a whole lot else to say except Florida State, they might only win one more. They've got Charleston Southern, so they might finish 2-10, which is just a wild turnaround from going 12-2. Just kind of unheard of to have such a huge drop-off. Virginia, Tony Elliott, his crew was moving up the power rankings. I had them really low at the start of the year. I think I had them 15 or 16 at the very beginning of the year. They had moved their way up, but they've kind of plummeted back down, getting absolutely obliterated, blown out by the UNC Tar Heels, having really just no answer for them on offense or defense is pretty surprising. And they look like they'll lose out now. So they've got Pitt on the road. That's probably a loss. That's November 9th. So I guess they have a bye week first, and then they go to Notre Dame. They have SMU and Virginia Tech in Lane Stadium, where they don't typically win. You got to think the most likely scenario is they lose out, 4 wins. And after a pretty good start, they felt good after that comeback win at Wake Forest. But that feels more of a toss-up game that happened to go their way. Above them, you have Stanford and Wake Forest. They played this past weekend. Very close game. Wake Forest might not be great, but they played some fun games. This was the second time third time I've watched them, at least in the second half. And another exciting finish. Wake earned a 27-24 win over Stanford. And they actually had to do it without DeMond Claiborne, their star running back, and they were still able to close it out. Stanford, for what it's worth, I'm at a loss here of how they were able to keep it so close with Clemson when they came to Death Valley. Now seeing how bad they are, Clemson probably should have dominated that one more thoroughly. But nevertheless, Clemson won that one, so no harm, no foul. But these 4 teams are sort of a tier on their own, and that's why I've grouped them together. I think these are the teams that are just not very good in the ACC. If you haven't already, jump in the comments, leave me your thoughts as we get going in this. Always fun to do that. This next group, another kind of big chunk of teams here, but I think they're sort of another sub tier in this right half of the screen here, where I don't know that any of these teams are good, but I do feel like this upper half is a good bit better than the last 4. North Carolina had a surprisingly dominant win over Virginia, which I mentioned. That was at Virginia too. Jacoby Criswell, their quarterback, threw for 293 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And the remaining games, which maybe seemed tougher at the beginning of the year, or definitely seemed tougher at the beginning of the year, Florida State would have seemed really tough. Now it's kind of looking like a North Carolina win. Wake Forest, probably a North Carolina win. Maybe I wouldn't have said that a couple weeks ago. Boston College is faded. I don't know that that's a UNC win for sure by any means. Obviously, I've got Boston College above them, but very winnable. And then NC State, which, again, not at all a UNC win by any means, but very winnable. So North Carolina could finish strong because sort of the reverse of what they normally do under Mac Brown. And then Boston College, they were up to a 20-0 lead, turnover-rated lead. They benefited from some mistakes Louisville made, but 20-0 lead, and they blew it to Louisville. Louisville's really a tier above, and Louisville earned that win in Boston. Now Boston College has to finish with Syracuse, SMU, UNC, and Pitt. So you got to figure maybe 2-2 if they're lucky. So BC, hot start. Then you kind of find out, that Florida State team's not that good. Some of their other wins, maybe not that good. The Michigan State win, only so-so. The close loss to Missouri doesn't look as good now. So there's a lot of that with Boston College. Cal, they destroyed Oregon State. I don't know that Oregon State's any good, but nonetheless, they finally could play someone not in the ACC, and they took care of business. They'll go to Wake Forest next week. I think that's their chance to win, or I think they have a good chance to win, which would be their first ever conference win as an ACC member. So that'll be big for them. And then NC State, they had off this week after beating Cal last week, so they remain above Cal. So there's your bottom half of the conference. And then here's where things get interesting. These three teams have all kind of beat up on each other. Georgia Tech beat Duke. Syracuse beat Georgia Tech. I think these teams are pretty good. Georgia Tech's interesting because they've kind of got injuries just mounting. They went to Blacksburg to play Virginia Tech. That's a game that you would normally probably lean on picking Virginia Tech now that they're playing decent football. But on top of that, Georgia Tech was without Haynes King, who's a great quarterback, and they were also without their linebacker Kyle Efford, really good linebacker. Those are two pretty big losses. They also lost their star running back, probably best playmaker, Jamal Haynes. Midway through the game, he ended up coming back. I don't know if he was 100%. So they only managed to loss in Lane Stadium. I still think Georgia Tech is plucky, but they're kind of this middle, kind of muddy middle here of this trio. Syracuse did beat Georgia Tech earlier in the year. They, you could argue any of these three in any order. And then, folks, if you're watching live, join in the comments and tell me how you'd order Duke, Syracuse, and Georgia Tech. I think they're really, really close. But Syracuse really got embarrassed. 3 pick sixes in the first half by Kyle McCord. Pittsburgh, this is a Thursday night game. Pittsburgh's defense just completely dominated. They ended up with 5 picks, 6 turnovers for Syracuse. Just an awful offensive performance for Syracuse and a dominant defensive performance by Pitt. Didn't really see a whole lot from the Pitt offense, to be honest, but it didn't matter. It was a 41-13 win. And we'll talk about Pitt later, but I thought Syracuse had a real chance to go to Pitt, earn a win. Was not the case, not even close to the case. And maybe that's a little bit more commentary on Syracuse, but at a certain point, you got to start giving Pitt credit. And I finally hit that point. And then Duke, they were at home. They had a really fun finish against SMU, had them on the ropes. SMU had 6 turnovers in that game. Just outrageous. I don't know if I said that about Syracuse. So it was SMU had 6 turnovers, which was just insane. And yet SMU was still in it there at the end. SMU gets the ball. They start driving for the game-winning drive with under 2 minutes to go, and they lose the fumble in their own territory. And Duke's got a chance to go down and win the game. They play it very conservatively, run the ball twice, don't even try a third down play. Just let the clock run down to 3 seconds to kick the game-winning 30-yard field goal. And a player on SMU literally jumps over the offensive lineman and then jumps up and blocks the shot like a basketball center. Blocks the field goal like a basketball center. Sends it to overtime. They each exchange touchdowns almost immediately. Duke goes for 2 and doesn't get it and loses. So SMU remains undefeated. Above them, you have Louisville and Virginia Tech. I think these are pretty good teams. I was really, really high on Virginia Tech at the start of the year. They maybe look silly, but now they've figured things out. This is the team I really expected them to be. Their offense isn't as dynamic, the passing game especially, as I expected, but they could run the ball with Bayshell Tootin. They're going to be dangerous, and Clemson's going to go there with a really tough game at Lane Stadium. It just feels like that's going to be a really tough night game. Louisville, they're a weird team because, on the one hand, they're the most normal team there is. They've lost to all 3 teams they faced. They're currently ranked. They beat all the kind of weaker teams they faced. But they go and they nearly lose to Boston College. They rally. They're 15th nationally in total offense. But in these big spots, a lot of turnovers against BC didn't kill them. They had 3 turnovers against Notre Dame, cost them that game. They had a terrible fumble, scoop and score they gave up to Miami, cost them that game. SMU beat them more straight up, but they had turnovers in that one too. I think they're dangerous. If they play Clemson this weekend, and we'll talk about this, but if they can avoid turnovers, they could be very dangerous. But I don't know that they can do that. So then we get in this top half, and here we finally have movement. I have finally moved Pittsburgh above SMU. Like I said, dominant win. against a decent Syracuse squad. Didn't see that coming. Thought it would be another one of these kind of close games like they've been having. Pretty much all their decent wins have been close ones. Even like UNC was close. Just they haven't been dominant. And here they were totally dominant. Meanwhile, SMU just about loses, maybe should have lost to Duke. So finally, Pittsburgh, who is undefeated, jumps them. Miami also undefeated. They took care of Florida State 36-14. They only led 17-7 at halftime. Cam Ward only threw 208, threw for 208 yards, didn't have any passing touchdowns. For him, not great. Wasn't quite the blowout we expected. Florida State kept it within what ended up being a 22-point game. But nonetheless, Miami never really in trouble against our rival. And then Clemson had the week off. I didn't think anything Miami or I don't know that Pittsburgh could have done anything against Syracuse jumped that high. Miami didn't look, overly dominant. I don't know that they could have done anything against the worst team in the ACC to jump Clemson this week. The Clemson-Miami-Pittsburgh thing, SMU too. More chance for movement next week. But that is your ACC power rankings there. Jump in the comment section. Let me know what you think. And of course, as always, go Tigers. Now, let me bring on Houston Burnett from Shaking the Southland. Houston, thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Glad to finally be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. I know you were out of town, finally got back, and jumped right on here with me. So appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, man. I've been at a roofing conference in Orlando for the entire week. And it's crazy. It's actually, it's not as crazy as it sounds. It's crazier than you would think. So I had a lot of fun down there, and I'm just glad to be back. Glad to get back just in time to watch football yesterday. And it's been a fun season this far.
Yeah, you might say you were feeling on top of the world in Orlando.
Yeah, it was all under one roof.
All right, that's pretty good. All right, well, let's jump in. I want to talk about this Louisville game. We'll preview that, and we can talk some basketball later. So Louisville's kind of maybe it's the most normal team. Maybe they're a little weird. I can't quite decide, but they're 5-3, 3-2 in the ACC. And they basically won every game you'd expect. They beat Austin Peay, should have beat them, beat Jacksonville State, Georgia Tech at home. No surprises there. They go on the road, maybe a little closer than it should have been, but they take care of business against UVA and BC in close wins. So no great, you could say the same about Clemson. They played 3 teams that are currently ranked. They lost at Notre Dame, close game. If they don't commit 3 turnovers, they probably win. Close game at home to SMU, and a close game at home to Miami, where they gave up a fumble, scoop and score, back and forth game. They score 45 points, still lose. So, just like Clemson, they've beaten every bad team they've faced, and they've lost to every ranked team they've faced, but they've faced 3 ranked teams. So it's a much different record. Let's start high level, your first thoughts or overall kind of impressions of Louisville so far.
They're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I know that, it's easy to say, hey, they're the most normal. It's correct. They found a way to win against inferior competition. But if you kind of delve into the metadata a little bit, you look at, they had to come back from 20 down against Boston College. You look at the Georgia Tech game. Georgia Tech had a blocked field goal run back for a touchdown and also couldn't convert from the one. There are 2 touchdowns there that they gave up. That's a different result when you go back and look at those highlights of that game. And Georgia Tech outgained them by over 100 yards in that game. Virginia, I watched a lot of that game. It was just kind of back and forth, and Virginia couldn't punch it in. I want to say Virginia had a goal line stand. They couldn't score on Louisville. So Louisville has been able to kind of survive and advance against inferior competition, but it's going to be a step up. You could easily make the case that some of the turnovers were so, hokey pokey against both Miami and Notre Dame that they could have won those games. But at the same time, the biggest high level thing that you look at if you're at Clemson and you're going to try to expose is their secondary is a major problem. They've given up a ton of yards and they've given up a ton of points. So if you're Garrett Riley, you're dialing up everything you can to get Wesco, Moore, and Williams out in space.
Yeah, I agree with you. Their run defense, I was looking at it, and the run defense is fine, but the pass defense is very iffy. And that sort of leads me to a question I wanted to ask about Cade Klubnik. I didn't do a recap. I was out of town, as I mentioned, after the Virginia game. So let's talk about it now. I thought Cade really struggled. The interception he threw was probably, I want to say probably the worst interception I've ever seen him throw. I mean, quadruple, not triple, quadruple coverage, like in a little diamond around him, threw it directly to the guy. I was watching screaming, no one's open, no one's open. And he threw it directly to the defender. There were several throws that were just severely missed, including, I think it was Burningstool, but a receiver in the end zone, completely open, overthrew him by 4 feet out the back of the end zone. He settled down. He went over 300 yards. He got the job done. You do that against, Georgia, you get blown out. You do it against Pittsburgh, you might lose. If you do that against Louisville, do you lose?
Here's the thing about that. I mean, I think we have a natural assumption as Clemson fans to be like, he's going to keep doing this as a quarterback. He could. I'm not ruling that out. But also, it's like, all right, well, we've seen with the best, Trevor and Deshaun, them having games that were not. And so I mean, even games that they might have lost. Think about Deshaun. Deshaun did not play, I guess, up to his snuff standard against Pittsburgh in 2016, and he still broke the single game record for passing in ACC history. But he threw 3 crucial interceptions. I would argue that his interception against Pitt is the worst interception I've ever seen, ever.
The one in the end zone?
In the end zone. That was egregious. That was such a terrible pass. And so you can't always just assume that's going to happen. But at the same time, it was, you're correct. He was off. He was a little excited. But I feel like for Clemson fans, it's kind of I'd rather be talking about, well, he was kind of off this game a little bit than the opposite of the last 3 years, where it's like we as fans cannot see a downfield pass ever in the last 3 years. This is like, all right, we just got to see him, zip it in there, get a little bit more. And I think the bye week has come at a very good time. I think the best thing that's happened to this team is them getting dropped down to 11th in the polls. You're coming against 3 teams in the ACC coming up that could be problems, they could be scary, but they also have some pretty glaring weaknesses that you could expose, and it could be really problematic for them early on in a game if you're able to expose them. So I think that's the first thing that you need to do is you need to get on top of Louisville first and expose that secondary, keep things clean. Because like you said, if you keep a clean game and they turn the ball over, as in Louisville, this could be a really, really daunting task for Louisville if they cannot play a clean game.
Yeah, and so you mentioned Clemson drops in the AP poll, which is interesting. So just going to quickly go over that. It's Oregon, Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State, Miami, Texas is the top 6. Certainly that seems fine to me. Then it gets more interesting as it goes. Tennessee 7, that's a 1-loss Tennessee, a 1-loss Notre Dame at 8, undefeated BYU at 9, who jumps Clemson, and a 1-loss Texas A&M who jumps 4 spots to get in that 10 spot above Clemson. I don't know. I mean, Clemson could be 8, 9, 10, 11, but I think what stands out to me is, right after Clemson, it feels like, the teams below Clemson are a tier different. You have Iowa State, Indiana, both undefeated. You have 2-loss Alabama. You have Boise State. You have 2-loss LSU. So it feels like Clemson's kind of like on the dividing point, right? So to me, which side of that dividing point they're on is how good is Klubnik. When he plays like he did against NC State, Clemson could beat a lot of those teams in the top 10. If he plays, like he did some of the worst stretches of the Virginia game, there may be more like in Indiana. So I'm really fascinated to see, can he just dominate what is not a very good pass defense? And then this is the first, which is so weird. There's only 3 common opponents on the schedule between Clemson and Miami, and this is the first one we get to see. Well, sorry, second one, Florida State, but Florida State, so bad, almost not helpful. But this is like the good one, right? The other one being Wake Forest. This is the good one. They put up 45 in a loss to Miami. Can Clemson do something like that? And it's interesting because I think Clemson will. I think Clemson will put up points. But I want your thoughts on this. Louisville, they ranked 15th in total offense nationally. Tyler Shough, he has played one more game. He has 512 more passing yards than Cade Klubnik. Again, an extra game, but still, that's to even be a little ahead of him is pretty impressive. I think this offense is pretty dangerous. Am I right on that?
They're a good offense. That's not discount. I mean, they have some very talented wide receivers. They have two really good backs in Chaney and Brown. Brown's the freshman. I think Brown could end up being likely he's on track to be freshman of the year, rookie of the year in the ACC. Just not to slight Wesco or more. I just think that Brown's got more touches. He's a little bit more visible as a freshman. He could end up being your freshman rookie of the year in the ACC. But with that being said, you look at how Notre Dame got after him. You look at other teams like even Virginia and Georgia Tech were able to create pressure problems for them. The thing about Miami, I know, and this is not on their offense. Cam Ward, you're not going to get me to say anything bad about Cam Ward. He's every bit as good. Miami's defense is not good. It's just straight up, it's bad. Yeah. And Louisville was able to expose that. 45 points. There was no cheapness to that. They scored all 45 on Miami, going right down the field on them, no issue. So I think that's more of an indictment on Miami's defense necessarily than Louisville has a very good offense, but 45 on a top 5 team, that's a problem to me. When you look at Notre Dame, who was able to hold them to 24 points, but also turn them over, I want to say 3 or 4 times in that game. Turnovers against SMU. SMU was able to move the ball up and down the field on them, but also stop them. And I don't think SMU has the talent like Miami does. If you look pound for pound, SMU was able to stop them more than Miami was. So I think out of all 3 of those defenses, SMU, Miami, and Clemson, I think Clemson's the most talented, the most disciplined, and has the most potential to stop them the most in this. So that's why I think they are dangerous, but also if you think that you're going to just get a repeat performance like Miami, I would caution any Louisville or any person that believes that 45 is just going to be the norm against a team like Clemson.
Yeah, I would not predict Louisville to go score 45, but I do think it's a test against the Clemson defense, which probably the best in the ACC, but maybe even despite that, still not up to the usual Clemson standards. And I would, I'll preface that with I think it's the backups. I think the starting 11 are very good, and the backups need that time to grow, and which is, you need to play them because they're not good. So then you're going to give up points. It's sort of an ironic thing, but that's going to be tested. Is it really just the backups? We're going to find out, because I think this is the best offense. I think it's fairly obvious this is the best offense Clemson has faced since Georgia. You can even argue more so than Georgia, but that's probably a scheduling thing. So this is the second best offense they faced. The last time they faced an offense like this, they gave up 30 plus points and lost. So let's see. I think this is a big test. Anything else you want to hit on this before we wrap?
I think it's just a matter of I would be interested to see kind of the pacing of the first half in this game. I think the common theme that you've seen since the Georgia game, or really even the Georgia game, if you really think about it, is Clemson has played great first halves every game this year, at least defensively. Offensively, since the Georgia game, they've come out and they have smoked everybody that they've played, or at least put up big numbers. And if that continues, when you put Louisville in a hole, I seriously doubt that a 20-point lead would evaporate against the Clemson defense. When you put something like that on film where you're consistently coming from behind, if Clemson's able to replicate that, then I think it could be a good Saturday for Clemson.
Yeah, so two last things I want to mention. You talked about Isaac Brown, the freshman running back. His stats are awfully similar to Phil Maffa's, which is really, really impressive for a freshman. And he's done it on fewer carries. So Maffa, 682 yards rushing, and Brown, 649. They both have 6 touchdowns, but Brown's actually averaging more yards per carry. So really impressive for a freshman. And then just my final thought on this, I think Clemson wins. I don't know if they're going to – I think Clemson could score 45, but I don't know if they're going to give up 35 or if it's going to be like a 21, 20, 17 type game. So that's what I'm most interested in. Will this defense prove itself? Much like Louisville, Clemson's faced one playoff team. They lost. They played 6 teams that are probably, hoping to even just make a bowl, and they beat bad teams badly, which is all you can do. Well, now they got like kind of that upper middle class team. This is a solid opponent, but they're certainly not a playoff team. If Clemson is who we think they are, we think they're a top 10 team, I think Clemson takes care of them more like 45-17 than 45-35. So that's what I'm looking to see. And I think that'll be this will be honestly Clemson's most interesting game since the opener.
I agree 100%.
Well, Houston, thanks for joining for this. Let's hit the music, and then we'll hit our next topic. Man, I'm excited to be talking Clemson basketball for the first time, and feels like a year. It's weird because it feels like that Elite Eight run was also just very recent. But Here we are, not this Monday, but the first Monday in November. Clemson will start their season at home. They'll have a couple cupcakes to get rolling, but then they've got a great home schedule. Before we dive into that, I want to set the stage with you. You can jump in with any comments here, but just what happened last year. Obviously the Elite Eight run is in everyone's mind, but just the flow of the year. They started out 9-0. One of those was a conference win against Pittsburgh. Then they go into ACC play. They immediately lose Miami, UNC, Virginia Tech with a pit game early, which is a weird thing they do. So they're 1-3 in conference play. All that momentum's lost. They split their next 6 going 3-3, and it seems like the season's kind of like not done, but wasting away what we're used to. They go on the road. They beat UNC in Chapel Hill, second time ever. And then they go on this run, including that one, 6-1. And you feel like they're back. They've locked up the tournament bid. But then they lose 2 of 3 to close the regular season. Finish 21-10. Pretty good. Feel okay. They didn't get that double bye in the ACC tournament. We still feel okay. Boston College is not that good. They already beat them. They get blown out by 21 to Boston College. At that point, what were you thinking, Houston?
I was like, this isn't it. And it sounds terrible at the time. I was just like, man, I'm kind of hoping for like an upset loss so the seat can be hot. We had seen this song and dance before. We were all like, oh, whatever. This is going to be the same old, same old. So I think I wrote about this on Shaking the Southland. I was happy to take an L in the tournament last year, and all my takes and all the hate and everything like that, to see the basketball team come out and play like they did, to have Alabama in a position where Alabama had to fight to win in the Elite Eight. I was glad to be pleasantly wrong, to see Clemson come out and just do what they did in the tournament last year.
Yeah, my attitude was almost as negative as yours. My thought was, if they just go out and lose to New Mexico, they're not going to make any coaching changes after making the tournament. But it just feels like really a worst case scenario where, hey, you made the tournament. This is technically a successful season, but nobody feels that way. Everyone's upset. No one's enjoyed this. And so to me, it was setting up for a worst case scenario. And I really like Brad Brownell, but you got to have results. And I was watching that game. One of the most nervous weird nervous feelings, because it was like, the season is a total success if we beat New Mexico. It is a total failure if we lose to New Mexico. My opinion on the program hinges way too much on this one game against this, this is not a major conference. This is so weird. But they beat them. Then they beat Baylor, who's the best win in school history. Then they beat Arizona, which surpasses that as the best win in school history. The last time they've been to the Elite Eight once, but I think it was like Utah State, BYU, and Lamar, which respect, but not the same. And then they lose to Alabama. But like you said, Alabama was so hot. Honestly, Alabama got a little lucky to just be shooting that well. And I know we did too against Baylor and Arizona to some extent, but Alabama was insanely hot. I think we're the better team. And so that was just an insane run. The most fun sports run since Clemson was winning national championships, like since 2018. So that's the backdrop. So I want to start there. Now let me share this, because I think this is interesting to say the least. So Clemson loses a lot, man. PJ Hall, leading scorer. Joe Girard, 3-point assassin, set the school record with 105 made 3-pointers. He did also set the record for 3-point attempts, but nonetheless, record-breaking 3-point season. Jack Clark, who I criticized a lot, but he was locked down on D and came through in the tournament. Godfrey, kind of a Charles Oakley type physical guy, but came through in the tournament. Beadle, not the biggest loss. He's going to Boston College. Hemingway, good 3-point shooter, but I put the numbers there so you could just see how few attempts he had because he was always hurt. He's off to Vanderbilt, and then Boslida exhausted his eligibility. He was honestly expected to be more of like a fill-in, minimal minutes for PJ Hall. And to be quite frank, he didn't really live up to those hopes. He did hurt his shoulder, but also he kind of struggled when he did play. So let's start here. Let's talk about the losses. I think they're pretty significant. Just your thoughts on these.
Yeah, I mean, losing Hall and Gerard, that's pretty devastating. I mean, I'll talk more about the arrivals and who's left and how there is a lot of positivity around what's there. But, Hall and Gerard, Hall is one of those types. He's been at Clemson for, his entire run since the 2020 season. He's been at Clemson guy. He's going to be one of those that's going to be remembered. So not just from the scoring factor, but he kind of had the it presence of Clemson. He's going to be kind of remembered in that lore of, a Trevor Booker or a James Mays or Buckner. PJ Hall is that. He's going to be kind of the guy from this Elite Eight run. But much like we remember those types, Joe Girard, to me, and I love Terrence Oglesby. Terrence Oglesby was the one I wanted to be growing up. Joe Girard has, in 1 year, kind of surpassed that productivity that Terrence Oglesby was able to do. There were a few times Girard, I feel like, could have been a little bit better, and there were times that I feel like he might have been off his game in crucial moments, but at the same time, he came through clutch in the tournament. He hit shots. He was everything anybody wanted him to be, which was that guy on the outside. He had handles, but he could also shoot the lights out of the ball. That's what he did. He did that. So he's the Terrence Oglesby that actually was able to make it to an Elite Eight. I hate that Terrence Oglesby got knocked out by Villanova back in 2008. I think that tournament it was a joke. In that one, that was a really good team, but I think this one was for Terrence Oglesby. This one was for T.O. Joe Girard was for T.O. on that one. So those two are the biggest. Now the others, I mean, if I'm being honest, I feel like a lot of what's coming in may actually be better. You look at Beadle, he didn't produce a whole lot. Hemingway was hurt a whole lot. Lida didn't produce. And then Godfrey's one that, and Godfrey and Clark was one that, he was going to exhaust his eligibility. He was good on defense, spotty when it came to shooting. Godfrey's the only one that kind of disappointed me that he went to the pool. He had a lot of potential as far as being that guy in the post that he may have not had the size that PJ Hall had, but he was a physical specimen when it came to post play. He's got the body of a defensive end. And when you have somebody like that knows how to get to the rim, knows how to protect the rim, that's going to be somebody that's going to be really good if they develop the right way. So out of all of those, the one that I was most disappointed about of the portal was Godfrey. But if you talk about arrivals, there are some others that I'm actually intrigued to see just because I really like some of their film. And so it's not a total loss.
Let's jump right into that. So I think the guy, and feel free to disagree, but the guy that I thought was the most direct kind of RJ Godfrey replacement, and I think Godfrey left, maybe it was going to be hard for him to start. Maybe Georgia just gave him a lot of money. I don't know. But either way, Miles Foster seems like he'll probably come off the bench, but play tons of minutes. So it's a very similar role. He's not going to shoot threes. Godfrey didn't shoot threes. He's not huge. He's not a center. He's certainly not tall enough to be. But he also reminds me of Charles Oakley, where he's like 245 pounds. He's going to be like heavier than like the 6'11", 7 foot. He's going to weigh more than like Christian Reeves potentially, even shorter because he's got so much muscle. And that's like that Charles Oakley, like tough guy, not like fighter like a hockey guy, but just he's going to battle. He reminds me of Naz Bohannon from a couple years ago.
Yeah,
but I think more upside, a lot more upside. Yeah. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing. Miles Foster, correct me if I'm wrong, he's only like 6'6", right?
I think it's 6'7". 6'7".
Yeah, but that's kind of small for a 4, which is kind of what he's going to play. But like you said, he's in there. I don't want to put it in a term. He's not like the type of guy that's getting trash buckets. Like, he knows his body, he knows how to move around, he knows how to create space, and he knows how to create issues when he's going to going to the hoop and getting rebounds. He's an animal rebounding. That was the thing that jumped off of me of his film. He gets after it. And I think that's kind of the energy that you need right now, coming off the bench. If he's spelling, whether it's Lakin or Shefflin that he's coming in for, having somebody that just does not care, and is going to sacrifice his body to get rebounds, who's going to go up there, who's going to be an issue to deal with. You kind of just need a bulldog right now that can come in and provide some minutes. I think Mons Foster is really good. The other post player, I know he doesn't have a lot of film, but the small amount that I have seen of Christian Reeves, if he develops, because I think I have a feeling that Brad Brownell sees this as well. It's an if thing. He's been injured. He's a 7-footer. He played at Duke. But when he does play and he moves around, he's got the type of body type and athleticism that could change the game at Clemson. But he just hasn't had a chance to do it. And he's got a lot of development and all that. So it would not surprise me if early on in his career, he's got like 3 years of eligibility left too, I think. He may not see a ton of minutes this year. But as time goes on, he might be the type of person that if Clemson is able to put it together and have a turning run, you take out somebody experienced like Lakin or Shefflin who does really well. They're both big physical bodies. And then you put in a 7-footer that knows his body now and can move around. That is almost impossible to stop in the late season. I mean, you think about who's the big tall guy for UConn that –
Klingon.
Yes. And maybe not necessarily in that, but it could be if you got a Klingon type. I don't think you can like shoot it or anything like that. But you have a 7-footer and he's good. That's a problem come March. And I think that's the gamble. That's the gamble that Brad Brownell is willing to take with this. Is he's going to hurt. Could be a risk. This could also be a program changing talent that you get down there.
Yeah. So to that point, let me pull this back up. So PJ Hall leaves. You're not going to replace him with one guy. He's I think a top 10 player in school history, right? He's kind of right there with like a Trevor Booker type. So to replace him, you get Victor Lakin from Cincinnati. He's had some injury issues, but I think when he's healthy, he's going to be maybe not 18 points, but maybe like 10 to 12. And then you got to remember PJ Hall, honestly, not a great rebounder given his size. He was getting like 6. And so I think you can expect about that from Lakin. And then Foster, he's going to, I think, have the role that Godfrey would have had. And check this out. I was just pulling this up while you were talking. So PJ Hall, his defensive rebounding percentage, which is how many rebounds of the available rebounds that he could have gotten, did he get? He was at 18.1% last year. So that's defensive only. Oh. And then you look at Miles Foster, 23.6. That's 82nd nationally. So just like you said, just a real ball hawk, just going to go crazy fighting for the rebounds, use his strength. So really an upgrade there from a rebounding perspective, certainly not scoring. And then Christian Reeves, he's backfilling Bas Lido, but in a very different way. And that I think he's already going to be better than him right from the jump and play more minutes because he's not behind Hall, he's behind Lakin, which is a big difference. But like you said, I think it was a medical red shirt. So he's still got plenty of eligibility left. I think he's a guy that helps now, his depth, but helps long-term eventually a starter when Lakin's gone. Foster's gone. I mean, I think that's 1-year guys. So he's going to eventually be expected to do a lot. This is kind of his work-in year. Let's talk a little bit about Jack Clark. We touched on him. I know he did a lot rebounding and a lot of guys like him. And that starting 5 when he was in there was actually incredible. It was like statistically one of the most efficient groups together. But boy, was he hard for me to watch. And I love good defense. I was a horrible offensive player when I played. I played like Jack Clark minus the rebounds. But gosh, he was a black hole in offense. How big is this loss really?
Here's the thing. There's 2 guys on that list of additions that aren't on there that I consider additions. I don't necessarily know if they're 1-to-1 for Jack Clark, but they might be. When you look at Jake Heidbreder and Asa Thomas, bingo. All right, so there you go. And so Heidbreder maybe not, but Jack Clark was more or less your in your forward range. And I mean, Wiggins and Thomas, I think while Wiggins has the upside to be Jack Clark as far as defensively. Wiggins is still oozing with a ton of talent. Wiggins also is getting better as a scorer. I think Wiggins, this could be his big money year. Wiggins, if he has a big year, Clemson, the ceiling is the roof, as Michael Jordan would say. If Chauncey Wiggins has a big year this season, which would answer your question, if he has a big year, this Jack Clark loss probably not going to be as big. In fact, if you look at that bottom side, because I know that Jack Clark might occasionally pop down to be a 4, but you're looking at somebody like Shefflin. I trust Shefflin more at the 4 anyway. I trust both the 4s that are there. So I think out of all the losses, Jack Clark, while he was, you do need a glue guy. You need a guy like Clark who's going to just get after it. Losing is not an option type that's going to just fight and play defense and all that kind of stuff. But if you can get a guy who can do that and score, I think that's a bigger bonus. So I would say Clark is probably on the lesser end of what's going to be hurting Clemson, this year as far as what they lost.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of going back to losing PJ Hall, which I think statistically, obviously the biggest loss. What has me torn about Clemson's ability to replace him, and I love the guys they brought in to replace him. I love that Heidbretter's coming off redshirt. Asa Thomas is presumably ready to contribute. That's all great. PJ Hall in the tournament wasn't good. He had one good game. He had 2 pretty lousy games, fouled out twice. He had one game where he went, only one of those games did he put up 15 or more points and 5 or more rebounds. He struggled at times, right? Mm-hmm. But on the regular season, in addition to just the points, his shot percentage, which is like the percentage, basically like usage percentage, how much Clemson leaned on him when he's on the court, how often is he taking the shot, basically how central is he to the offense. He was 34th nationally. So Clemson leaned on him. He's number 1 in usage percentage for a single season of all Clemson players of all time. So they revolved when he was on the court. And of course, he did foul out sometimes, but when he was actually on the court, they really revolved the offense around him. So that's my concern with PJ Hall. Do you see enough playmaking here? And we do. There's another transfer we haven't talked about. It's probably the most significant one. But do you see the playmaking here to make up for that?
Well, while I don't see you knew you were going to get between 15 to 22 points out of PJ every game. I think part of what they went to this year is it's not like PJ Halls grow on trees. So you're going to have to kind of make up for that with some of what you're getting. So if you can get a guy like Victor Lakin, and he may not be able to get you that 22 to 25 dominant performance, but you can get 12 to 18 points out of him, and a Foster that can supplement when he's in, or a Reeves who can supplement an additional 8 to 10 points. It may not be a one-to-one thing where the offense is revolving. You might have to actually get creative with what you do with your set pieces, but you still could get that production if, something like what you said, Foster's a better rebounder. Lakin might be a good rebounder as well. You might be using them in different ways than what they were doing. Because, think about last year. They were having PJ Hall pop out a lot. Personally, I think they used PJ Hall way too much beyond the three-point line. I think that was something that I'm sure somebody said, hey, you probably need to start developing a shot like this if you're going to go play in the pros.
They shot 32% from 3, which is not helpful.
It's not. And, look, for a post guy, maybe that's not the worst. But you think about games like that where you're just popping out. I can't remember which one it was like. Later in the season, he just kept popping out and just kept missing them. And you're just like, man, there's a better way to do this. And so maybe without somebody like him, you're able to utilize strengths in Lakin and Shefflin and Foster and Reeves and Wiggins to get them to play that way. It may not be as central, like, all right, we got this one dude, but you have a bunch of guys that may be able to do things a little bit differently that could shake things up this year. So, yeah, I think that's the long and short of it this year as far as, you don't have a central guy, but I don't think the production will be fully gone.
Yeah, and I think the game you're thinking of was the late road loss at Notre Dame. He was 2 for 10 from 3, which
that's exactly it.
That kills you,
Yeah.
One guy we got to talk about is Jaden Zachary. He's really the biggest name transfer. He was really good for Boston College. Obviously, Clemson played Boston College twice. He totaled 40 points in those two games, of which Clemson was 1-1 against BC. He's a good three-point shooter, but that's not like his main thing. So it's very different having Hunter Girard versus Hunter Zachary. Zachary's more of a Chase Hunter type, where he's a slasher. He's going to create. He actually had more assists per game than Chase did last year. So they're both kind of combo guards, but he can shoot the three. So I'm going to pull up some of these three-point percentages. He shot 40.5% last year. So that's pretty good. I think you're looking at him as one of the two guys are going to be counting on for three-pointers. That's not his game. So I think we're going to see a different style. Clemson shot a lot of threes last year with Girard in particular. I think there's going to be more attacking, more aggressive cutting, more aggressive driving. So that should be, I think Hunter Zachary is going to be one of the more interesting and fun backcourts we've had, I don't know, in a very, very long time. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they actually have a lot of depth as far as the backcourt goes and a lot of different combos. I think that you can move Zachary around to where if you need to give Chase Hunter a spell or if he's in foul trouble, Zachary can run point if you need be. I think it'd be interesting if you trotted out Zachary and Hybrid out there. If you're going for more of a smaller lineup that can shoot a ton, they might roll that out there. But Hunter and Zachary is going to be what you roll with. And that is unique because I don't remember a time where it's been a while since we've had two, or we as fans have seen two slashing guards that both like to create.
Right, it's like having two Marquise Reeds on the court at the same time.
Yeah, I guess the last time would be like Marquise Reed and Shelton Mitchell, but
yeah.
I there's a lot more, to me at least. There's a lot more potential with Zachary and Hunter if they're able to play up to their ability. But you also look at somebody like Del Jones, tossed in that mix. I don't know how much he's going to play. I'm sure he's got to do, get up his weight, everything like that. But his film, man, he's an animal as far as just the physical tools he's got, and the fact that Coach Brunell is already mentioning him as somebody that's going to get out there, maybe get some minutes early on, all that kind of stuff, shows that he's got he's got something. And so it wouldn't surprise me if especially in these early scrub games, Clemson's up by 20 against North Florida, I think, or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, Charleston Southern, Florida A&M, whatever. Yeah,
sure. One of those. To see Del Jones go in a little bit earlier or to work him in earlier, I'd like to see what he's got. If he's going to be, is he a? What I'm curious about, and this is always the big thing going from high school to colleges, is he going to be a Chase Hunter or a Jaden Zachary, or is he going to be like a Rod Hall, where he's good, he's just going to be a distributor, but just seeing his physical attributes, he could be a lot more than that too. So I'd like to see him early on get in there, and if he's worth it, let's see what he does.
Yeah, I could see him kind of filling the Josh Beadle role, but having more long-term upside.
Yeah.
I think the one thing we haven't discussed that could present some downside for Clemson is the three-point shooting. They lose so much with Girard. Yeah, I know Hemingway wasn't healthy, but they do lose at least the potential there. I don't love that PJ Hall shot as many as he did, but he did make 52 three-pointers last year. He shot 165, actually second most on the team. Not the best strategically, in my opinion, but nonetheless, he shot a ton of them. Clemson's got to make up for all these made threes somehow, or maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. Zachary helps. Hydebretter helps. I think those two additions are the biggest way you do that. But I've highlighted three guys in yellow here. Shefflin shot 47% last year. He's not going to do that again, but can he shoot close to 40%? With greater volume, he only shot 49 attempts. He only made 23. So great percentage, but low volume. You almost want to double the volume and see if he can hold it close to 40%. Wiggins, can he continue to get better? And then Chase Hunter was abysmal all season from three. Very ends, not all season. He was really abysmal for the first 2/3, and then he picked it up, and that numbers actually went up a lot. It was just way lower. And then he was very good in the tournament. Can he continue kind of the way it ended and be more of a 35, 36, 37% guy? If so, they're fine. But if Hunter's still a 31, 32% guy, if Shefflin regresses, they could be in trouble and not have shooters. What do you think about that?
Well, I look at it as like, all right, if Shefflin can keep it towards 40 and Wiggins keeps it up, and you have Zachary and you've got Heidbreder that are more known shooters. If Hunter stays at that low range, because I mean, I don't have the numbers pulled up, but I don't think he's ever been really that strong in the 3-point shooting in the years that Clemson's had him. But one person that, again, we don't know because we haven't seen him, that could maybe be a supplement if he's, 34% 3-point shooter, would be somebody like Asa Thomas. That's part of the reason why he's been brought in is he's a bigger guy. He can shoot it. He might be the person that gives Chauncey Wiggins a spell. And so that's the great unknown. So at one time, on one side, what you said is correct. You could be at a loss for shooters. But at the same time, if those numbers hold similar to what they are, maybe Shefflin drops off a little bit, maybe a couple others pick up the slack. What if Asa Thomas comes in and shoots 35%, 36%?
Yeah, and I've heard he's been comped to a young Hunter Tyson, right? So that's in there.
Yeah. And so if you have that, you may not need a guy to up the percentages as much as it is him come in and supplement for what's not there, which is what I could see. Is that Shefflin shooting at higher volume, so maybe he's a little lower, but he's still shooting well, and Hunter kind of stays the same. Maybe Asa Thomas comes in instead of having this as not as many shooters, you just have more that are kind of around the same range. It could be a completely different looking team if you think of it in that way. If you have, two guys that are shooting close to 40, 3 guys shooting close to 40, and then a bunch of other guys that are shooting like 35%, that changes the dynamic of scoring on this team. And it might provide kind of that answer to the prior question of how does this team kind of score and who goes through what and what goes through who in this, if you got more shooters that are more dispersed throughout the roster.
Yeah. And, as we're talking about a team that's very even in terms of there's not like a PJ Hall that's going to be very heavy in usage percentage and kind of the locus central point of the offense. You have different guys pop off. Chase Hunter has a chance to be a superstar. Right? If he does what he did in the tournament in his regular season, he's an elite like NBA level guy, right?
Yeah, 100%. And look, that's not what's saying. He could turn into this season to be something incredibly special. I'm not leaving that out at all. Like he's already a great point guard, one of the best in Clemson history. It's just 3-point shooting has not really been his forte as much as it is, somebody who's a driver, slasher, he can kick it out, do all that kind of stuff. But if he has 3-point shooting to his game, that changes the whole dynamic of the season.
Yeah, and he regressed last year. He was better the year before that. Let me see. He was 35.6% the year before, and he was 34.5%. So if he can even get back to that, and last year can just be, a dip, Clemson's probably okay then.
Yeah.
Wanted to hit you with 2 last things. I thought it was really interesting. Clemson gets, so the top 3 teams in predicted order finished by the media in the ACC, Duke, UNC, Wake Forest. Clemson gets them all at home, which works in your favor in a big way. If you could win 2 of them, now you've got huge advantage, tiebreakers in the standings. If you still lose them, then you're really in trouble because you've lost 3 home games or maybe 2 home games, and then you got to pick up some road wins against like Pitt, right, which is gonna be really tough, or games like that. So that's an interesting wrinkle. I'm gonna ask what you think about that, but I also want to mention Clemson gets, in addition to Duke, UNC, and Wake Forest, they also get Kentucky at home. South Carolina's on the road. What home game are you looking forward to the most? So I guess your thoughts on the schedule with some of those home games, ACC, and just in general, who you're looking forward to.
This is one of the coolest home schedules they've ever had because it's not just Kentucky, UNC, Duke. You get Memphis at home.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
You get Memphis at home too. So you get 3 true blue bloods and one that's, a very proud program in Memphis. And early on, at least, you've got to feel confident that you've at least got a shot in those 4. I'm not going to say that they're going to win all of them. That's a tough task to do. But you feel a lot more confident now. Cautious optimism, that's going to be the key words going forward. It's cautious optimism that Clemson can put this together and do something pretty good this year. I think that they've got the lineup to do it. I think there's a lot of, a little more excitement on the recruiting trail. And so it's going to be an interesting year. I want to see how they market these games, because I don't recall as early a season game as big as this is in Clemson with Kentucky coming to town.
Right.
That's going to be fun. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that. If I can find a way, I'd love to go, just because you don't ever see this. And so I would say that's the most exciting game. But the home schedule itself is really, really unique this year, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, that's the Tuesday before the ACC championship, December 3rd. So I'd probably say Kentucky is the game I'm most looking forward to, excluding, which ones I'm going to actually attend, but just, on its face. Kentucky, Clemson has a pretty good chance to win that one, 69% according to KenPom. And speaking of KenPom, let's take a look here. Whoop, there we go. Okay, so last year Clemson finished ranked 19th in the KenPom rankings and went 21-10, 11-9 in conference. This year, very similar prediction, but a little bit more weighted towards ACC success. Clemson was insanely good in non-conference play, as I mentioned, starting 9-0. But what I think, to me, this makes a lot of sense. The ACC is getting weaker by virtue of adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU. Clemson will play all of them. They play everybody once, at least, right? Because it's still this huge 20-game schedule. The 20-game schedule makes more sense now that you have this outrageously big conference. They play their rivals, which is Florida State, Georgia Tech, twice. And there's one random team because the math doesn't really work. And that random team this year is Virginia Tech. So a pretty favorable draw for Clemson. What do you think about KenPom's projection? Kind of where do you stand on this?
I would agree with that. I'm, again, cautiously optimistic that Clemson can hit that number. I think if you go 21-9 this year, 21-9 and 13-7, likely you're going to probably be the same seed in the tournament. And likely you'll be a dangerous team to have to play in the tournament next year if that's what it holds. The thing that is concerning is, the last time this happened, Clemson had gone to Sweet 16. They had taken Kansas to the wire. Everybody was feeling good. You had Amir Sims coming back. And then it was just a wet fart the next year, and you end up losing to Wichita State at home in the NIT.
Oh, man.
And
that was brutal.
It was brutal. And so this is kind of the, you've had the prove it year for Brad Brownell. He proved it. He got the Elite Eight. Now it's all right. Can we really see something being built here? Because I'm not gonna lie, the recruiting that he's been able to produce since then is impressive. There are high school recruits that he's landed or have gotten commitments from that I don't think that Clemson would be in the same range as they would have been just a couple years ago. And that just shows that he's at least got an idea on how to utilize NIL, the transfer portal, the whole 9 yards.
I think he's fantastic at that. And I think you see he's used NIL, and he's got big time transfers like Joe Girard, who could have gone to LSU, chose Clemson because of the culture, and I'm sure the money was good enough. And then that leads to winning, and that leads to better high school recruits, and then you get that ball rolling.
So we'll see if this is the year. Again, I'm not going to be mad if this team doesn't go as far as the Elite Eight this year.
No, certainly not.
I think that any rational Clemson fan is going to be pleasantly happy if Clemson makes it to the tournament this year, because you got no PJ Hall. You're in kind of an odd little year. So you get there, and if you win the first game, everything from that point is a bonus.
That's my view too. If they miss the tournament, to me, that's a huge failure. Mm-hmm. If they make it and they can't win a game, I'm not going to call it a failure, but I'm not going to be particularly stoked about it. You win an NCAA tournament game, that is really impressive. Do you know how many times Clemson's won NCAA tournament games in consecutive years?
It's been since Barnes?
Cliff Ellis. Barnes never did it. One time in school history has Clemson won NCAA tournament games, round of 64 or later, ever in consecutive seasons. I think this team will do it. I think they've got a better than 50-50 shot to do it at least. I think you're seeing, like you said, they went to the Sweet 16. It certainly helped, but, they didn't – the trajectory eked up but it was not consistent. It was not a clear, shooting up. This is a chance to really start moving that needle.
Yeah, I agree 100,000%.
Cool. Well, that's a great way to end this. Houston, this is Houston from Shaking the Southland. Folks, check them out there. Hey, I really appreciate you joining.
No problem, man. Always glad to talk Clemson athletics.
If you enjoyed this video, please help this channel by liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Also, if you're a pet owner and you live in the upstate, check out our sponsor, Ready Vets. They offer immediate walk-in care when your pet can't wait. They're open 7 days a week till 10 p.m. They're owned by 2 Clemson grads. They're located in Taylor's, just 10 miles from the Woodruff Road shopping district.